Alrighty. Is this thing on? This thing's on. Okay. Let's go to Leviticus. We're going to start studying Leviticus tonight. I asked for suggestions, and Gus McMurray said he wanted to study Leviticus, and so I told him he has to be here every week for the next 13 weeks. So, starting off strong. No. But we're going to study the book of Leviticus, but we are not going to go verse by verse through. I'm not going to do that to y'all. The book of Leviticus is a very tedious book that is not applicable. Let me rephrase that. It is not amenable to us today. We are not amenable to it. So I'm not going to make y'all study the book verse by verse. But what we are going to do is look at the concepts and passages and the overall idea of the book of Leviticus. Okay. So tonight, what we're going to do is, because we have next door set up for the baby shower and everything, we're going to take a little bit of a shorter study tonight, and we're going to take the first study that I was planning and break it into 2 weeks instead of just tonight. But we still have a lot to cover tonight, even with us only doing half of it. So let's dive right in, okay? First off, like we usually do when we start a book, y'all tell me everything you know about the book of Leviticus. Do what? You heard it can be controversial. I mean, I guess it can be if you try to take Leviticus and live the book of Leviticus and as a Christian, you cannot do it. It is impossible to do it, right? So I guess that would be controversial in some ways because there are passages in there that are just impossible for us to do today, right? So yeah, what else? Ron, what you got?
Well, at least there's four important themes that appear.
Yeah, like what?
And one would be, for example, correction of the tabernacle.
Right.
And the other would be the second orders and the Levites.
Do what? You're going to have to talk loud. These speakers, and I'm deaf.
The second concept of holiness.
Oh, holiness. Yeah. Yep.
The third would be the major concept emphasized the role of sacrifices.
Okay, sacrifices, yeah.
And the fourth would be talk about the covenant.
Right, yeah. So we're going to talk about two of those tonight, but not in depth. So it talks about how Jews are supposed to worship, where they're supposed to worship, what they're supposed to use in worship, so the tabernacle and all the fixings of the tabernacle. It talks about what kind of sacrifices and how they're supposed to sacrifice and in what ways. It gets even to the detail of what they're supposed to do step by step when offering a sacrifice. And it talks a lot about being holy, which is kind of the topic that we're going to cover tonight, which is the first part of this study is how were they supposed to be holy, okay? As Jewish people, which is what the book of Leviticus was written to, it's part of the Pentateuch. Does anybody know what the Pentateuch means? First 5 books of the Bible. Those are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, right? That's called the Law of Moses, okay? So the Law of Moses, the books of Moses, the writings of Moses, the Pentateuch, all of those are synonymous in the New Testament. It talks a lot about those things. Leviticus is one of those. It is the book that when they left the Red Sea and they left Egypt, they were officially out of Egypt. Leviticus is the instructions that Moses was given for them to worship, right? So they were supposed to build the tabernacle. We'll talk a lot about the tabernacle when we get there. They were supposed to worship in certain ways, offer certain sacrifices at certain times, and it goes over a number of the feasts, but not all of the feasts that they were supposed to take. And then the book of Deuteronomy, the word Deuteronomy literally means second law, but it's a second repeating of the book of Leviticus. And in reality, Deuteronomy is a more readable version of Leviticus because it does have more of the narrative behind it. In Leviticus, there's only one passage that is narrative based, and that is chapter 10 with the death of Nadab and Abihu. Okay, so Leviticus, written by Moses, written after they left Egypt when they were wandering around the Sinai Peninsula, and let's see what else. Talks about the way that they were supposed to worship. Now in the New Testament, we don't have a book in the New Testament that is like Leviticus. Okay, so we'll talk about this next week specifically, but the reason why I said we're not amenable to the law, to the book of Leviticus, is because the laws that are in it are not meant for us. They're meant for Jewish people. We live under Jesus now, so it's not meant for us, but at the same time, it will give us a lot of ideas about how God expected them to live. And if we don't have a New Testament, what's the word I was looking for? A New Testament likeness in the book itself. We still have laws in the New Testament, right? We'll talk about that a lot next week. So, before we get to the book of Leviticus, we need to talk about the covenants that God made, okay? So, before Leviticus, there were two covenants. You had the law of Moses, which is the book of Leviticus, and the laws, the few laws that are in Exodus, the second telling of the law in Deuteronomy, and there are some laws in Numbers, but not. Numbers is more of a narrative-based book. But before that, before Moses came on the scene, there's a guy named Abraham. Abraham had a covenant with God. Can anybody tell me, what did God promise Abraham? Right? His offspring would be as numerous as the stars, or as the pieces of sand on the sea, right? Or sand on the beaches. Also that they would be given a specific land, right? Does anybody know what the name of that land was? The land of Canaan, right? So, all right, let's go to Exodus chapter 19. Somebody read verses 5 and 6. Exodus 19, 5 and 6. All right, so that is the first idea of this concept of holiness in the Old Testament. Okay, they're supposed to live differently. They're supposed to be a peculiar nation to God, His own nation, and so forth. Right. So there were times in the Old Testament when, especially like if you see when Moses and the Israelites are living at Mount Sinai. That God over and over again tells them they're supposed to live differently from the people around them. So the first covenant that God had was with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying you're going to be given a land. Through you, the nations of the earth will be blessed, and that your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars, what Dalen said, right? Okay, so that comes from Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. So I'm going to read this, okay? Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, from your kindred, from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So the first covenant doesn't have any real concept of holiness. The second covenant, what Megan read in Exodus 19, has this idea of holiness. Now, why do you think God would start off with a covenant given to the people that basically, okay, I mean, there's some implied there, but basically has no action needed on the part of the people that God is giving the covenant to, right? So a covenant in God's eyes is an agreement, and in that agreement, both sides have to meet their needed parts, right? So God is always going to meet his part. He's always going to fulfill his part. And so there has to be something that we do to fulfill our part of the covenant, right? But in the first covenant that God gave Abram and then subsequently Isaac and Jacob, there's no real fulfillment that is needed on the part of Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. Or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is there? He just says, you're going to have a lot of children. In you, somehow, the nations of the earth are going to be blessed, and I'm going to give you a land. Now, there's implied there, and that is they need to be faithful to God so that he can do that. And we see that through the book of Genesis, right? When Abraham is not faithful to God, God reprimands him or changes his mind or does something so that he continues to stay faithful to the covenant. Why do you think God, the first one, would not have a lot of, here's how you need to live in it? But in the second one, there's a lot more of that concept. Why do you think that is? Right. Right. Also, think about this. So, if you look at the overall picture of the Bible, right? The first covenant, or the law of Abraham, if you want to call it that, or the patriarchal system, or the patriarchal law, or there's 50,000 different preacher words to describe that concept, that covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay? They don't really know anything at that point, right? They know that they're supposed to worship. They know that they're supposed to offer sacrifices. But I challenge you, okay? I challenge you to find a passage in the book of Genesis talking to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or anyone prior to Moses that says, here is how you are supposed to worship. They knew that they were supposed to worship, and they knew some of the ways that they did it, but it was never written down. Part of that is because the book of Genesis is not written for them. It's written way after they're dead, right? But also, there's no written law for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it's almost like God was getting them ready, and he was teaching them a little bit here, and then a little bit more under Moses, and then when Jesus came, he told us everything that we needed to know, right? So he's getting them ready for it. So if you're going to teach your child how to do something, say you're going to do this, all right? Say you're going to teach your child how to drive a car, all right? Depending on what age, right? I'm from Arab. Learned how to drive when I was like 7 years old. But you're not going to teach the child how to race on a racetrack before you teach the child what is the gas pedal and the brake pedal and the steering wheel, right? If you're going to teach your teenager how to drive and they've never driven before, you're going to sit them in the driver's seat and you're going to say, okay, here's where your blinkers are and here's the gas. And if you push the gas, it's going to go forward. And if you put it in reverse, it's going to go backwards. You're going to start small and then work up, right? Richard Petty did not learn how to drive by his dad just putting him in a race car and putting him on a track and say, figure it out. It worked up slowly. Same concept with God. He's not going to give us, imagine, okay, just think about this for just a second. Imagine God is looking at Adam and Eve and they have just fallen and they're about to get kicked out of the garden, right? And he says, okay, you have sinned, you need salvation. Here's the book of Romans, figure it out. It's not going to work. It's not going to work, right? You have to bring them slowly but surely up. So that's why it took so long for God to send Jesus to die on the cross for the sin. So that's the first covenant. The second covenant, kind of what we read in Exodus 19, is this idea that you are going to be a special people, right? And it uses the word holy, okay? So let's read Exodus 19, verses 5 and 6 again, because I went out of order. I didn't mean to read it that early, but, sometimes when you don't write like a full outline, sometimes you skip around a little bit. Okay, so Exodus 19, verse 5. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine, and ye shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. So Moses, verse 7, came and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. All right, so the first covenant is you don't really have a lot that you have to do to fulfill this, other than just stay mindful of me and listen when I instruct you on more things, right? So you look like at the point when Abram is told that he is going to sacrifice Isaac, or he's going to circumcise his child, or so forth. They were getting laws point by point by point. Second covenant, they are given this concept that you are going to be holy, okay? Somebody tell me what holiness means. Does anybody know what the word holiness means? Go, what? To be set apart. New Testament, we use the word sanctified a lot too. They mean the exact same thing. Sanctified and holy, they are synonyms. They mean to be set apart. In the Hebrew, it's the word kadosh, okay? Kadosh. It just means to be set apart or to be holy. It is always in a religious context, okay? So, the word kadosh, the Hebrew language was written and made kind of alongside the Old Testament law. So this word was made for this concept of being set apart and being set apart for a reason. And here are some things in the book of Leviticus that are said to be kadosh, or to be holy, okay? Somebody get Leviticus chapter 11, verse 44 through 45. Leviticus 11, 44 through 45. All right, so a couple things that Leviticus 11 says that they should do in order to be holy. His name is supposed to be holy. How he's treated is supposed to be holy. The people, for I am the Lord your God, consecrate yourselves therefore, or sanctify yourselves therefore. So the people themselves are supposed to be set apart. You have, you go to like Leviticus 14 and it talks about the sacrifices. Somebody get Leviticus 16, verse 2. So the people of God, God himself, his name, how he is treated, the sacrifices that people give to him. All right, Leviticus 16, verse 2.
And the Lord said unto Moses, Speak unto Aaron thy brother, that he come not at all times into the holy place within the veil before the mercy seat, which is upon the ark, that he die. Not for I will appear in the power of the mercy seat.
All right, so he calls it the holy place. What's he talking about in Leviticus 16? What building, if you want to call it that, is he talking about in Leviticus 16? Tabernacle, right, the tabernacle. So the tabernacle is supposed to be holy. All the sacrifices they offer at the tabernacle is supposed to be holy. The people, Leviticus chapter 8, chapter 16, and chapter 21 all say that the priests are supposed to be holy or set apart. They're supposed to be different, right? If you look at, here's a good example. In the book of Acts, Barnabas. Barnabas is the son of encouragement because when the church needed it, Barnabas sold his land and gave it to the other Christians. Now, what's so special about that? Well, Barnabas was a Levite. In the Old Testament, the Levites weren't supposed to own anything. They're supposed to be separate or set apart or different, right? So they're supposed to be the priests. So he wasn't ever supposed to have that land in the first place, and he sold it for the good of the church. Okay? So the Levites are supposed to be different. When you look at the way in which Israel was supposed to work as a nation, the Levites were the only ones that were supposed to do any work with the temple or the tabernacle. They're the ones that are supposed to carry it. They're the ones that are supposed to take care of it, lead worship in it, offer the sacrifices, so forth. They weren't supposed to do anything else. Trivia question. How did the Levites get their food? Through tithing, and they ate the offerings. Right? So they didn't even have to work. It's a great job. No, they didn't even have to work. They were the people that were set apart for God. Okay? The feasts that they were supposed to observe, that's in Leviticus 23. Those were supposed to be set apart or holy. So the days that they had set apart, that they were their holy days, they were supposed to be different from every other day. In the Ten Commandments, it says that they're supposed to set the Sabbath aside, right? Same concept with their feasts that they were supposed to offer, or supposed to participate in. Everything that was given to God is supposed to be holy, okay? Now, what does holy mean? As the people, the second covenant that God gives them, what does it mean for them to be holy, okay? So back to Leviticus chapter 11. I am the Lord your God. This is verse 44 and 45. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not defile yourselves with any swarming thing that crawls on the ground, for I am the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. God did not free the Israelites from the Egyptian bondage simply as an act of mercy. He did it for a reason. He says, I brought you out of Egypt, and so now you get to live the way I say to live. That's the epitome of I brought you into this world and I can take you out, right? I got you out of Egypt, now you do whatever I say, right? I think that's a fair trade. But they were supposed to be different. Why does Leviticus 11 and a lot of other passages that we'll see as we go through this study, why does Leviticus 11 make it a point to say you're not going to defile yourself with any swarming thing or anything that crawls on the ground? Basically what he said is don't eat bugs. Why? Because bugs are nasty. Well, in reality, I know it's kind of nasty, and I know y'all already make fun of me about my pizza being stored in the oven, but if you have to, bugs are pretty nutritious, right? And most bugs are not going to hurt you if you have to eat them. Now that doesn't mean we should, because we live in 2023 with grocery stores. They eat bugs all the time, right? Brent Rice, the guy that runs Backwoods Christian Camp, he goes to Cambodia. Before COVID, he used to go to Cambodia every year. Now he focuses more on Backwoods, but he would go to Cambodia, and that's like the staple is cockroaches and crickets, and they don't even eat them chocolate covered. They put some oil and some chili on them and they eat them, right? But so it wasn't just because bugs are gross, it was because of a specific reason, and that is the pagans ate that. Why did God say in the book of Leviticus you're not supposed to eat catfish? Because the pagans used them. Or pigs. Pigs are great. He cooked pigs yesterday. He was texting me about the ribs he was cooking, right? Pigs are great. You're not supposed to eat pigs if you're a Jewish person, not because they're gross, but because they were used by the pagans. Okay, so they're supposed to be different from the people around them. They're supposed to be set apart for the people, for God's use, right? So, so that concept of being set apart for God's use wasn't just to make them different, just to be different. There are a lot of people. Is this thing still working? Yeah, okay. There are a lot of people that will claim that if you're going to live as a Christian, you need to be different just to be different. You need to live like the Amish people. You need to live like you're in the 1800s so that you're different from the people around you. You need to wear certain clothes so that you're different from the people around you. Now, is modesty important? Yes, we talked about that the other day. But we're not trying to be different just to be different. They weren't trying to be different just to be different. They were being different for a purpose, and that was to show them something. The Old Testament is God sprinkling little bits of truth along so that they could learn as they go and so they could learn as they get ready for it. He wasn't just going to put them in a race car and say, figure it out. And so he was teaching them little by little to bring them up to the point where when he says, I want you to be different, this is what we'll talk about next week. When he says, I want you to be different, they don't think, oh, that means we have to look weird and dress weird and speak in a different language just because. No, it was to teach them on what it means to be different from the world around you. So then as Christians, when we say you need to be different from the world around you, we have a better concept. So there's this idea that I really like. There's this idea that the whole Old Testament, yes, it was written for them, right? Of course it was written for them. However, the ultimate reason why the Old Testament was written was not just for them. It was for us too, right? All right, here's another trivia question. Can you, if you're walking on a desert island and you find a New Testament and you read it, can you become a Christian? Shake your head like this. Yes, you can. But you're going to get to the book of Hebrews and be completely lost. You're going to get to the book of Romans and be completely lost. You're going to get to Revelation and really have your mind blown. Because you need the Old Testament passages to fill those gaps in. So the Old Testament was, yes, it was written for them, but it's also to teach us a little bit along the way so we can see what God believes about things. So when, for instance, Leviticus chapter 10, right? Somebody give me a synopsis of the story of Nadab and Abihu. What happens? What happens in the story of Nadab and Abihu? I need to preach on this passage. Do what? Right. So God tells them, when you offer, Nadab and Abihu are two priests. God says, when you offer sacrifice, here's where you're supposed to get the fire from. Well, they got the fire from somewhere else. And so when they offer that sacrifice, what happens to that fire? It comes out and consumes them, right? And later on in the chapter, this is just an interesting little tidbit, and I'm just going to say it, and then we're going to move on. Later on, he says, if you're going to worship, don't have anything to do with alcoholic beverage while you're doing it. In the same context as Nadab and Abihu. That has led a lot of people to think that they were under the influence when all of that happened. I don't know if that's true. I'll ask God when I get there. But the only narrative story in the book of Leviticus, the only major narrative story in the book of Leviticus, deals directly with, I told you to do something, and you did it the way everyone else does it. You didn't do it the specific way that I told you to do it. Now, is that just because God is mean and he's hateful and he just wants to get people in trouble and he gives us laws just so we can fail? No. It's because when he tells us he wants us to do it a certain way, there's a reason for that. We may not understand that reason. It may not be our job to try to figure that reason out. You get to Genesis 6 and the flood. Why did God say that that Noah had to use gopher wood to build the flood or build the ark? Why? Because he just liked the look of gopher wood. No, I don't know. Doesn't matter. He said to do it this way, and it was teaching them a little bit at a time to get them ready to be different, right? So The book of Leviticus is all about how to be holy, how to live differently than the world around you. And if you're going to teach them how to worship, you're going to need to teach them how to be different, because what were some of the ways that the pagans worshipped? What were some of the ways the pagans worshipped in the Old Testament? Sacrifice children to the god of Molech, right? Molech was a giant god with his arms stretched out with a grate in between it. They would build a fire under the grate and they would put the babies on the grate. They would, what's his name? My mind just went completely blank. On Mount Carmel, when the prophets of Baal and Elijah, could not think of that word. When Elijah is facing off against the prophets of Baal, does anybody remember what the prophets started doing? They started cutting themselves. Why? Because they thought that bloodletting would make the gods happy. When Paul is on the boat and the storm comes, they think that throwing someone overboard is going to make the gods happy, right? So he teaches them in Leviticus how to worship differently than everyone around them, because the way that they worshiped was contrary to who he is, number one. And number two, he wanted them to worship in a different way, to teach them a little by little how to be different from the world around them. So that when he came in Jesus and he gave us the new covenant that we'll talk about next week, and he said, I want you to live differently and be different from the world around them, they would know what that meant. Okay? So that's kind of the beginning concept of holiness in Leviticus. The entire book of Leviticus is about holiness. Okay? And we're going, you know how when we studied Revelation, I think I said it's figurative about 1.5 million times. In Leviticus, I'm going to say he's trying to get them to be holy about 1.5 million times. Okay? Especially when we get to some of the laws that seemingly are arbitrary. A lot of the dietary laws are arbitrary, seeming. But you get into the concepts and theology and religious acts of the pagans, and you start seeing why he wants them to be different. Man, I think I just ripped my ear off. All right. Anyways, let's go ahead and take a little break. The kids will be coming over here in just a minute because, like I said, we're going a little short tonight. And then we'll get started with our invitation here in just a little bit. Thank y'all. Alrighty. Alrighty. I said we were going to end early, but they actually had kids tonight, and so Kelly was like, I needed to finish the lesson. I've been playing it for weeks. So now that everybody's back from gallivanting, what prayer requests do we have tonight? Of course, Forrest and Glenda, we need to keep praying for them. They're still recovering from their accident a week and a half ago. Who else? Who else has prayer requests tonight? No? The Keens are out of town for their anniversary, so be praying for them so they can make it back safely. And do y'all leave next week, Kelly? Next Tuesday? Okay. So be praying for them. I tried to ask Gus if it was going to be live streamed, and he said they're working on it, but he didn't know. They did finish it. Somebody's going to do it? Gotcha. So that'll be cool. So you can watch Tripp in the World Series if you'd like. Anybody else have any other prayer requests? All righty. What's our invitation song, Jason? 885. 885. All right, well, if there's no more prayer requests, don't forget, after worship, we're going to go next door and have a little baby shower for Kayla and baby and Dalen, and not baby Dalen, but I figured that didn't sound quite right when I finished saying it. But we're going to have a baby shower next door, so y'all stick around if you'd like to. All right, Dalen, it's all yours, brother.
Well, for the invitation, want to remind ourselves of what Lee mentioned with Leviticus 10 tonight, and in thinking about the death of Nadab and Abihu. That was a situation of they didn't basically honor God's words and worship God in the way that He commanded them, and so in thinking about that reality of God's commanded us how to worship Him, and more so just how to approach His throne. This invitation is, of course, for those who maybe have heard the call to accept Christ, but either haven't or they might have in the inappropriate way. And so a time like this is where we're able to reflect and really evaluate just, who is it that is calling us, and to make that decision. So if tonight is the night in which you want to be baptized for the forgiveness of sin, now is the time to do so. And also, if you do need any prayers and such, now is also that time. So we'll stand up and sing the invitation.
885. 885. How beautiful heaven must be. First verse. Let's sing. We read of a place that's called heaven. It's made for the pure and the free. These truths in God's word He has given. How beautiful heaven must be. How beautiful heaven must be. Sweet home of the happy and free. Fair haven of rest for the weary. How beautiful heaven must be.
Let us pray. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Father, we continue to ask prayers for those that were mentioned tonight, those that are on the prayer list. Father, we continue to pray for those members that are not here, that may be traveling, those that are getting ready to go out of town with the people. Father, we ask you to forgive us for any sin that we may have committed, known or unknown. We also pray, Father, that when we gather tonight for the stone, we pray that the meal that we receive, that we leave the word of our life, that we bless that. Again, Father,